My name is Ellie, and if you told me 3 years ago that I'd be in this mess, I would have laughed. 3 years. That's all it took for my life to turn from a romantic comedy into a daytime soap opera. It started with Jake, my husband, or as I now call him, the man-child I married. We met at a friend's barbecue, and he was the life of the party. Always smiling, always easygoing, or so I thought. The wedding was a dream, but dreams end, and reality hits hard. I remember the first time I asked him to cook something, and he looked at me like I'd asked him to solve a math equation. "Ellie, babe, you know I can't cook," he said with that sheepish grin I mistook for charm. "But Jake, you've got to learn." "I can't cook every night," I replied, trying to keep my cool. "I can barely make toast, Ellie. Why change now?" He shrugged, and that was that. I'd come home from work, tired from the day, hoping for a moment to relax, but instead I'd find Jake on the couch, controller in hand, waiting for me to serve dinner like some 1950s housewife. I worked my way up in the company, aiming for that promotion. It was hard, but I thought at least I had Jake's support. When I found out I was pregnant, I was over the moon and terrified. I thought maybe this would make Jake step up, but even that was like hoping for a snowstorm in July. We have our little bundle of joy and love. She was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thought to us, but Jake felt differently. "You know you make more money than me. It makes sense for you to go back to work," he said one evening as we sat exhausted on the couch, Iva finally asleep. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I was the only adult in the house. Jake, being a stay-at-home dad, means actually doing things at home, you know. He just nodded, eyes already drifting back to his game. Yeah, I got it. But he didn't get it, not really. His mom, bless her, would come over to help, actually to do his job. She was a saint, loved Iva to bits, loved me too in her own way. She'd shake her head, Jake, whispering, "You got your father's brains, but none of his sense." Then, like some cruel twist of fate, Jake's parents passed away within a month of each other. I was heartbroken. They were the parents I never had. Jake, though, just saw dollar signs. The day he told me he wanted a divorce, it was like any other Tuesday. I was chopping vegetables for dinner. Iva was drawing at the kitchen table, and Jake strolled in like he owned the place. "I want a divorce, Ellie," he said, not a hint of emotion in his voice. I stopped chopping. "What?" "I'm getting the inheritance, the house. I don't need this. Any of this." He gestured around at the home we built, at our life. "You mean you don't need us?" I said, my voice low, trying to keep it together for Iva's sake. "Yeah, something like that," he shrugged. And just like that, the illusions shattered. There was no happily ever after waiting for me. Just a grown man walking out the door, leaving his wife and daughter behind, chasing after the ghost of money yet untouched. That was the beginning of the end, or maybe it was a new beginning. Just not the one I expected. The night Jake left, I sat on the edge of Iva's bed, watching her sleep. My mind raced with what I needed to do next. The thought of divorce had danced around my head before, but now it was blaring at full volume. I had wanted to break free from the man who couldn't even fry an egg, but then Iva came along, and she changed everything. I remember the morning after Jake left. I was sipping my coffee, the silence of the apartment pressing down on me. Ava was at my feet playing with her blocks, oblivious to the storm in her mother's heart. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" she asked, looking up at me with those big, curious eyes. "He's gone to stay somewhere else for a while," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Why?" she pressed, sensing a deeper story. "Sometimes people need a little time apart," I said, hoping she'd let it go. "Will he come back?" Her voice was small, worried. I sighed. "I don't know, sweetheart. I don't know." That day at work was a blur. I was there physically, but my mind was a million miles away. When I finally got home, the loneliness of the empty apartment was a slap in the face. I had to do anything. I called my sister Laura, the one who always seemed to have her life together. "Laura, it's Ellie. Jake left," I blurted out as soon as she picked up. "Ellie, what happened?" Laura's voice was a mix of concern and, "I told you so." "He wants a divorce," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. There was a pause, and then she asked, "Are you okay?" "No, not really, but I will be. I have to be for Iva," I replied, finding a strength I didn't know I had. "You're better off without him, Ellie. You know that, right?" Laura's voice was firm now, the big sister coming through. "Yeah, I guess I do." "Good. Now let's talk about what you're going to do next." And we did. We talked about lawyers, finances, and how I was going to navigate being a single mom. Laura was a rock, and I clung to her advice like a lifeline. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings and paperwork. Divorce is like that. A lot of hurry up and wait mixed with moments of hardtack. I was angrier than I thought possible, but underneath that anger was a resolve forming. I was going to get through this, not just for me, but for Iva. She deserved a life free from the chaos her father brought. Ava was my light in the darkness, her laughter, her smile. They kept me going when all I wanted to do was curl up and hide from the world. One evening, as I was putting her to bed, she looked at me with those big, wise beyond her years eyes and said, "Mommy, I don't need Daddy. I just need you." And just like that, the edge of the decision wasn't so sharp anymore. I knew what I had to do. I was going to fight for a better life for both of us. It was time to let go of the life I thought I wanted and embrace the one waiting for us. Just me and Iva against the world. The divorce papers sat heavy on the kitchen table like unwanted guests that wouldn't leave. It's funny how a few sheets of paper can turn your world upside down. Ava was at daycare, giving me a few hours of silence to think, or maybe to avoid thinking. The apartment felt empty, echoes of the life we used to have bouncing off the walls. I tried to keep things normal for Iva's sake, but every night when I'd put her to bed and face the evening alone, the silence screamed at me. Had to do something with my hands to keep busy. So I started fixing things around the house. Stuff that Jake never got around to doing. One Saturday, the sink decided to start leaking, a steady drip that drilled into my brain. I had half a mind to call Jake and demand he come fix it just out of spite, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself in the hardware store, standing in an aisle of pipes and wrenches, feeling out of my depth. "Need some help." A voice broke through my confusion. I looked up to see a woman about my age, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, a name tag that read Maggie. "Yeah, my sink's leaking and I don't even know where to start," I admitted. Maggie smiled. "Let's start with the basics then. You got a wrench back home?" Armed with my new tools and a hastily scribbled set of instructions, I tackled the sink. It took me 3 tries and a lot of muttered curses, but I fixed it. There was a small sense of victory standing there, watching the water run smoothly without a single drop escaping. My phone rang, shattering the moment. It was Jake's Aunt Linda. I hesitated before answering. She'd been caught in the middle of all this, wanting to support her nephew, but knowing he was in the wrong. "Ellie, it's Linda. I was just wondering how you and Iva are doing." Her voice was tentative, like she was walking on a tightrope. "We're managing, Linda. How are you holding up?" "It's been hard. I miss seeing Iva." The guilt hit me then. Despite everything, Linda loved Iva, and Iva loved her. "Why don't you come over for tea tomorrow? Iva would love to see you." "Really? I'd like that, Ellie. Thank you." It wasn't just the broken sink that got fixed that day. Linda came over the next afternoon, and for a couple of hours, our little apartment felt like a home again. Ava giggled as Linda chased her around, and I realized how much I'd missed the sound of someone else's laughter in our home. Linda and I sat on the couch, watching Iva play, an unspoken truce hanging between us? "You're doing a good job, Ellie," Linda said, breaking the silence. I shrugged. "I'm trying." "No, really. Jake, he's my nephew, but he's not doing right by you or Iva." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the pain in her eyes. She was an aunt torn between her nephew and her grandchild, and despite everything, she was here, choosing us. Life after Linda's visit settled into a new kind of rhythm. Eva's laughter filled the gaps in our little home, and my days blurred with work and motherhood. I almost forgot about Jake. Almost. Then came the call that pulled him back into our lives like a bad rerun of a show you never liked. "Miss Ellie, this is Harold Greer. I'm the executor of your late father-in-law's estate. I'd like to schedule a time for you to come in and discuss the will." The voice on the other end of the phone was formal, detached. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Of course, Mr. Greer. When do you need me?" "We've scheduled the reading this Thursday at 3:00 p.m. Will that work for you?" I agreed, though my mind was racing. What could possibly be in that will for me? Jake was the son. Surely he'd be the one to inherit. I shook the thoughts away and focused on getting through the week. Thursday came too fast. I sat in a stiff chair in a lawyer's office that smelled of leather and old books. The room was quiet, too quiet. Jake sat across from me, a smug look on his face. He hadn't even said hello. Mr. Greer cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming. I'll get straight to the point." He read through the legal jargon, and with each word, Jake's smile grew wider. But then Mr. Greer said something that wiped the grin right off Jake's face. "And to my granddaughter, Iva, I bequeath the majority of my estate, including the family home and associated assets. To my son, Jake, I bequeath the ownership of my apartment on 5th Street under the condition he maintains employment for a period of no less than 6 months." Jake's mouth dropped open. "What? That's it. The apartment? There's got to be some mistake." "No mistake, Mr. Jake. Your parents were very clear." Mr. Greer's voice was steady, unyielding. "But I'm his son. I'm supposed to get everything." Jake's voice was rising, a temper tantrum brewing. "Your father believed in hard work, Jake. He wanted to encourage you to stand on your own," I found myself saying, surprised at my own calmness. Jake turned on me. "This is your fault, Ellie. You turned them against me." Mr. Greer interjected. "Your parents made these decisions long before your separation, Jake." The room spun with the weight of the revelation. I was to manage a fortune for Iva, a future I could secure for her. And Jake? Well, Jake was left with an apartment and a challenge. The days that followed were filled with a relentless barrage of calls and paperwork. Jake was furious, calling at all hours, his voice oscillating between begging and demanding. "Ellie, you have to talk to Greer. You have to get him to change this. It's not fair." Jake's voice was desperate one afternoon, the anger giving way to something that sounded like fear. "It's done, Jake. Your parents made their decision," I said, trying to keep my voice steady while Iva played in the background, blissfully unaware. "But you can do something. You have control over Iva's share, right? We're still married." He was grasping at straws, and we both knew it. "Even if I could, I wouldn't. This is for Iva's future, not for us, not for you to squander," I replied, finality in my voice feeling like a nail in the coffin of our relationship. He hung up with a string of words I was glad Iva couldn't understand. Savoring ties with Jake was like cutting through a thick, gnarled vine that refused to let go. The divorce proceedings turned sour, with Jake's lawyers trying every trick in the book to get him a piece of Iva's inheritance. But my resolve was ironclad. I was fighting for my daughter now, not just for myself. The day we stood before the judge, Jake looked deflated, a shadow of the brash man who had demanded a divorce with such arrogance. The judge, a stern-faced woman who didn't suffer fools, gladly spoke. Mr. Jake, it seems to me that you're trying to claim what has been clearly and legally bequeathed to your daughter, she said after hearing Jake's lawyer out. But she's just a child. I'm her father. I should be. The court finds no reason to deviate from the will as it stands. The petition is denied. The judge cut him off, her gavel hitting the block with a thud that echoed in the silent courtroom. The dust had barely settled from the courtroom when the full weight of the will's revelation began to sink in. I was now not only the sole caretaker of Iva, but also the steward of her future. It was a daunting reality, a heavy mantle that I carried out of the courthouse that day. I sat down at our modest kitchen table, the sunlight filtering in and landing on the stacks of legal documents that spelled out Iva's inheritance. I shuffled through them, the words trust and estate leaping out at me. They felt alien, too grand for our simple life. My phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize flashing on the screen. I answered tentatively. Miss Ellie, this is Janet from First Community Bank. We need to schedule an appointment to set up the trust for Iva. Right, of course. When would be a good time? I replied, feeling out of my depth. How's Monday at 10:00 a.m.? We can go over everything and make sure you're comfortable with the process. Janet's voice was kind, reassuring. Monday at 10 it is, I confirmed, a small part of me still in disbelief. Monday's meeting was a marathon of signatures and notaries of terms like fiduciary and beneficiary. Janet was patient, walking me through each step. You're doing a great thing for your daughter, Miss Ellie. This will secure her future, she said as we wrapped up. I smiled, a mix of pride and nervousness bubbling within. I just want to do what's best for her. That evening, as I watched Iva play, her innocence and joy untouched by the complexities of adult life, my phone rang again. It was Jake. Ellie, can we talk? His voice was subdued, almost unrecognizable. Jake, I'm really busy with Iva right now. Can it wait? I replied, not ready to let him disturb our peace. It's about the inheritance and the apartment. I need some advice, he admitted, and I could hear the struggle in his words. I hesitated, then sighed. Okay, Jake, what's going on? I'm thinking of selling the apartment. I don't know what to do, he said, and I could picture him running his hands through his hair in frustration. Jake, that might not be a bad idea, but make sure you get some good advice on how to manage the money. Maybe put some aside for Iva for the future. There was silence on the line for a moment. I hadn't thought of that. Thanks, Ellie. The calm before the storm. That's what life felt like in the weeks following the establishment of Iva's trust. The small oasis of peace was shattered one Tuesday morning when a process server showed up at my door with papers that screamed legal turmoil. I thumbed through the documents, each page a punch to the gut. Jake was contesting the will again, claiming that as Iva's father he deserved a portion of the inheritance to ensure her well-being in his hands. My hands shook with a cocktail of anger and fear as I dialed my lawyer's number. Michael, it's Ellie. He's doing it again. He's suing for a part of Iva's inheritance, I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking. Michael's voice was a steady force. Ellie, we knew he might pull something like this. We're ready. We'll fight this and we'll win just like last time. I took a deep breath, trying to absorb some of his confidence. What's our next step? We meet, we plan, and we protect what Iva's grandparents wanted for her, he replied. The legal wrangling felt like a twisted game, with Jake playing the victim, pushed into a corner by life's unfairness. But this wasn't a game, this was my daughter's future. In court, Jake's lawyer painted a picture of a father sidelined from his daughter's life, cut off from the means to care for her. Your Honor, my client merely seeks to provide for his daughter in a manner befitting the legacy left by her grandparents, the lawyer said, gesturing toward Jake with practiced sympathy. The judge turned to me. Miss Ellie, do you wish to respond? I stood, my legs firm despite the butterflies. Your Honor, everything that has been done is in the best interest of my daughter, as outlined by her grandparents. Their wishes were clear, and I intend to honor them." The judge nodded, her gaze flicking between me and Jake. "I will review the case and render my decision. We're adjourned." Days later, the decision came down. The will would stand as it was. Jake's claims were dismissed. I called Linda to tell her the news. Her voice was weary when she answered. "We won, Linda." The judge sided with us again. I said. There was a pause, a heavy sigh. "I'm glad, Ellie. It's what my brother wanted, for Iva to be taken care of." I hung up the phone and watched Iva, her brow furrowed in concentration as she colored. This little girl, unaware of the battles being fought in her name, was the reason I'd weathered the storms. As the legal clouds cleared, I promised myself that I'd build a life for her so full of love and stability that no amount of turmoil could shake her foundation. Months passed since the court upheld the will, and life settled into a new, more peaceful pattern. The legal turmoil was behind us, and ahead lay the open road of new beginnings. I was sitting on the porch, the evening sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, when Iva came bouncing out, her hair in pigtails and a grin on her face. "Mommy, look what I drew at school today," she exclaimed, thrusting a piece of paper into my hands. It was a drawing of the two of us holding hands under a big, bright sun. "It's beautiful, Iva," I said, my heart swelling with love for this little person who had been my rock through the storm. "Miss Ellie, there's a call for you," called Mrs. Parker, our neighbor who had become a friend and sometimes babysitter. I walked inside, curious. "This is Ellie." "Miss Ellie, it's Janet from the bank. I wanted to let you know that the trust for Iva has been set up successfully, and we've made the first investment for her future education." A wave of relief washed over me. "Thank you, Janet. That's wonderful news." I hung up and went back outside to join Iva, who was now chasing fireflies as they began to light up the twilight. "Mommy, do you think Daddy will come to my birthday party?" Iva's question came out of nowhere, her voice hopeful yet uncertain. I paused, considering my words. "I don't know, honey, but we'll have a great party with or without him. The most important thing is that we're together." Iva nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer, and went back to her game. Later that evening, after Iva had fallen asleep, I sat down with a cup of tea and the last of the day's mail. There was a letter from Jake. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a short note. "Ellie, I've been doing some thinking. I'm sorry for everything. I'm getting help, trying to get better. I won't bother you for money again. I hope I can be the father Iva deserves one day. Jake." I set the letter down, a complex mix of emotions churning inside me, anger, relief, hope, all battling for prominence. I realized that Jake's journey was his own, and while I hoped he'd find his way for Iva's sake, my focus was on the life I was building for us. The next morning, Iva and I planted flowers in the garden, her laughter filling the air, mixing with the sound of the birds and the rustle of the leaves. It was a simple moment, but it was ours, and it was filled with the promise of a new day. As we patted down the last of the soil, I looked at our home, the garden, and my daughter, and I knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, but there would also be joy, growth, and love, the kind that survives even the darkest storms. "Mommy, will the flowers grow big?" Iva asked, looking up at me with wide, hopeful eyes. "Yes, Iva. With a little care and time, they'll grow big and strong, just like you," I said, taking her hand in mine.
"You really live like this every day?" Kira's words sliced through the silence, dripping with disdain as her eyes wandered around our modest living room. It was a seemingly innocent question, but it struck a nerve, a familiar chord that had been playing on repeat ever since my sister-in-law decided to grace us with her near-constant presence. "What do you mean?" I asked, unable to mask the sharpness in my tone. The refrain of Kira's disapproval had become a tiresome accompaniment to our otherwise quiet and fulfilling life. "Oh, you know," she waved a hand dismissively, "this whole minimalist thing you've got going on." Her lips curled into a smirk as she plopped down on our worn but comfortable sofa, making herself at home once again, uninvited. I opened my mouth to respond, but Eli cut me off with a gentle hand on my arm. "Kira, we like our home just the way it is," he said in a placating tone as if trying to soothe a wild animal. "It suits our needs perfectly." I bit back the retort that hovered on my tongue, swallowing the bitter words that would only escalate the situation. Eli meant well, but his refusal to confront Kira's entitled and invasive behavior only fueled my resentment. "If you say so," Kira shrugged, reaching for the remote control. "Hey, did you guys get that new cable package? I want to see if they have that home improvement show I was telling you about." Without waiting for a response, she flicked through the channels, her eyes glued to the screen, as if she owned the place. Meanwhile, Eli cast a helpless glance in my direction, silently pleading for me to maintain the peace. But this was our home, our sanctuary, a place where we had planned to welcome our first child into the world, and Kira's constant disruptions were slowly eroding the joy and anticipation that should have filled these moments. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in the storm brewing within me. Confrontation would only breed more chaos, and I couldn't afford to let Kira's negative energy taint the precious time I had left before our baby arrived. So I plastered a smile on my face and excused myself, retreating to the bedroom, where I could escape the suffocating weight of her presence. But as I closed the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that Kira's intrusions were just the beginning, and that far more turbulent times lay ahead. Kira's visits became increasingly frequent, coinciding with every significant milestone in my pregnancy. As my belly swelled with life, her presence seemed to suffocate the joy that should have surrounded this miraculous time. "Oh, good, you're here," Kira exclaimed one afternoon as she barged through the front door, her usual greeting devoid of any genuine warmth. I was worried I'd missed the big event. "Kira, what are you talking about?" I asked, confusion mingling with the all-too-familiar dread that knotted my stomach whenever she appeared unannounced. "The baby shower? Of course." She rolled her eyes as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "I assumed you'd be having one, you know, to celebrate and get all the essentials for the little bundle of joy." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "We're not having a baby shower. Eli and I decided we'd rather keep things low-key and intimate." "Low-key?" Kira scoffed, tossing her designer handbag onto the couch. "How utterly boring. You need to embrace the excitement, Mara. This is a momentous occasion, and you're acting like it's just another day at the office." Before I could respond, Eli emerged from the bedroom, his hair tousled from an afternoon nap. "Kira, what a nice surprise," he said, his voice tinged with a weariness that told me he found her visits just as draining as I did. "Eli, can you believe your wife isn't having a baby shower?" Kira demanded, rounding on him with her hands planted firmly on her hips. "It's like she's just going through the motions instead of celebrating this incredible journey." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Eli beat me to it. "Mara and I discussed it, and we're happy with our decision," he said, trying to placate his sister as he so often did. "This is our first child, and we want to keep things simple." Kira scoffed again, her disdain palpable. "Simple? You two have never done anything but live a simple life. It's no wonder you're so woefully unprepared." Her words stung, hitting a nerve that had been fraying for far too long. I turned to Eli, hoping he would finally take a stand and defend our choices, our lifestyle, me. But he simply shrugged, his eyes pleading with me to let it go. The bitter taste of disappointment coated my tongue as I swallowed my frustration. Once again, I found myself alone in navigating Kira's intrusive and entitled behavior, with Eli's passive acquiescence only enabling her further. As Kira prattled on about the lavish event she would have planned, had she been in charge, I felt a wall solidifying between Eli and me, a barrier constructed brick by brick with each dismissal of my concerns and each failure to confront his sister's disrespect. And in that moment, I knew our quiet, fulfilling life would never be the same. Morning sickness had become a cruel companion, sapping my energy and leaving me nauseous and drained. As I lay curled up on the couch, trying to find solace in the quiet stillness of the house, the shrill sound of the doorbell shattered the fragile peace. "I'll get it," Eli called from the kitchen, his voice already tinged with resignation. I knew that tone. It meant only one thing. Kira had arrived unannounced yet again. "Mara?" Eli's voice rang out, confirming my suspicions. "Kira is here." I groaned inwardly, bracing myself for the impending tornado that was about to rip through our home. "Just tell her I'm not feeling well," I called back, hoping against hope that, for once, Kira might show a shred of consideration, but my plea was met with silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of Kira's voice, grating and intrusive as ever. "Mara, are you still wallowing on that couch?" she chided as she swept into the living room, her presence instantly suffocating. "You're not even trying to hide the fact that you're a miserable lump these days." I bit back the angry retort that rose in my throat, knowing it would only escalate the situation. Instead, I turned my face away, unable to bear the sight of her smug expression. "Kira, Mara isn't feeling well today." Eli tried to intervene, his voice wavering between exasperation and appeasement. "Maybe we can catch up another time?" But Kira waved off his suggestion with a flick of her perfectly manicured hand. "Nonsense. I'm here now, and I'm sure Mara could use the company." She dropped onto the couch beside me, her proximity suffocating. I fought the urge to recoil, my skin crawling with disgust at her utter disregard for my boundaries and well-being. "You know, I never had morning sickness like this when I was pregnant," Kira continued, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. "Then again, I actually took care of myself instead of lying around feeling sorry for myself all day." I snapped. "Kira, I'm not in the mood for your criticisms today," I spat, the words tumbling out in a rush. "If you can't be supportive, I'd rather you just leave." Silence hung in the air, thick with tension. Kira's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line of anger. "Well, I never." Mara's right, Eli's voice cut through the charged atmosphere, surprising us both. "She needs rest, Kira. I think it's best if you go." For a moment, I dared to hope that Eli had finally found his resolve, that he was standing up for me and our family. But then Kira's gaze shifted to him, her eyes narrowing even further. "Fine," she snapped, rising from the couch in a huff. "I'll go, but don't expect me to be so accommodating next time." Sure. With that, she spun on her heel and stormed out, leaving a tense silence in her wake. I turned to Eli, searching his face for a sign that this moment had truly been a turning point, that he was finally seeing Kira for who she was. But his expression was troubled, his eyes pleading with me to understand. And in that instant, I knew Eli had not chosen me over his sister. He had simply done the bare minimum to maintain the peace, as he always did. As disappointment and resignation washed over me, I realized that the true tipping point had not been Kira's behavior, but Eli's continued failure to defend me and our family. And in that moment, I knew that something had to change, before Kira's toxic presence destroyed us all. The voicemail from Kira was the final straw. Her shrill voice, dripping with disdain, announced yet another unannounced visit, as if our home were her personal playground and our boundaries mere suggestions to be ignored. I stared at my phone, anger and resentment burning through me like wildfire. I had endured Kira's intrusions, her blatant disrespect, and her toxic presence for far too long. And Eli's failure to stand up for me, to protect our family, had only emboldened her entitled behavior. Enough was enough. I sprang into action, moving through the house with a newfound determination. I emptied the pantry, the cabinets, the refrigerator, stripping them bare until only the barest essentials remained. Kira wanted to treat our home like her personal domain. Fine, let her experience the true consequences of her actions. As I worked, my mind raced with the knowledge that I couldn't stay here, couldn't continue to subject myself to this constant onslaught of disrespect and disregard. I needed space, a sanctuary away from Kira's toxic presence, a place where I could breathe, regroup, and strategize my next move. I quickly packed a bag, grabbing only the essentials. There was no time to dwell on sentiment or attachment. This was survival, a desperate bid to preserve my sanity and protect the well-being of my unborn child. Just as I was about to leave, Eli walked through the door, his brow furrowed in confusion as he took in the empty kitchen and my packed bag. "Mara, what's going on?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. I met his gaze, my resolve unwavering. "I'm going to stay with my parents for a while," I said, the words falling from my lips with a finality that left no room for argument. Eli's eyes widened. "What? Why? What happened?" I shook my head, disappointment burning hot in my chest. "You don't see it, do you? You refuse to acknowledge the damage Kira is causing, the way she tramples over our boundaries and disrespects me at every turn. Well, I'm done. I can't keep subjecting myself to this toxic environment." Eli opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Don't try to talk me out of this," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of my emotions. "I need space, Eli. I need to get away from Kira's constant presence and your refusal to stand up to her. Until you can see the truth and make real changes, I can't be here." With that, I shouldered my bag and pushed past him, my heart heavy with the knowledge that our relationship hung in the balance. But as I stepped out into the crisp evening air, I felt a glimmer of hope. A sense that, by taking this drastic step, I might finally be able to reclaim my power, my dignity, and my life. And if Kira thought her intrusions had been disruptive before, she had no idea what was in store. The game had changed, and I was no longer playing by her rules. As the familiar sights of my childhood hometown rolled past the car window, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This is what I needed, a sanctuary away from Kira's toxic presence, a place to regroup and regain my strength. "Mara, honey, are you sure about this?" My mother's gentle voice broke the silence, her eyes filled with concern. I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve. "Yes, Mom. I can't keep living like this. Kira's behavior has become unbearable, and Eli refuses to stand up to her. I need space to think, to figure out my next move." My father's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. "That sister of his has always been a piece of work," he grumbled. "I never understood why Eli couldn't see her for who she really is." "It's like she has him under some kind of spell," I sighed. "No matter how much she disrespects me or tramples our boundaries, he just lets it happen, as if keeping the peace with her is more important than protecting his own family." The disappointment in my voice was palpable, and my mother reached across the console to give my hand a comforting squeeze. "Well, you did the right thing by getting away," she said firmly. "Let Eli deal with the consequences of his sister's behavior for a change. Maybe then he'll finally see the light." As we pulled up to my parents' cozy bungalow, a small flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe this was exactly what Eli needed, a wake-up call, a taste of the chaos and strain that Kira had inflicted upon our lives for far too long. Without me there to act as a buffer, to absorb the brunt of her demands and disrespect, Eli would be forced to confront the full weight of Kira's entitled nature. And perhaps, just perhaps, that experience would finally open his eyes. "Come on, let's get you settled," my dad said, breaking me from my thoughts. "We've got your old room all ready for you." As I stepped into the house, the familiar scents and sounds enveloped me like a warm embrace. This is what I needed, a safe haven, a place to gather my strength and formulate a plan. Because I couldn't stay away forever. Sooner or later, I would have to return and face the consequences of my actions. But when I did, I would be ready to draw a line in the sand, to demand the respect and boundaries that Kira had so blatantly disregarded. And this time, I wouldn't be alone. Eli would have no choice but to see the truth, to acknowledge the damage his sister had wrought upon our family. And if he refused to make the necessary changes, to stand by my side and protect our little family, then I would have to make a choice, one that I had never imagined possible. But for now, I pushed those weighty thoughts aside, allowing myself to bask in the warmth and security of my childhood home. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight I would rest, fortifying myself for the battles that lay ahead. The shrill ringing of the doorbell pierced the silence, shattering the fragile peace that had settled over the house since Mara's departure. With a weary sigh, Eli dragged himself from the couch and trudged to the door, knowing exactly who he would find on the other side. "Kira," he greeted his sister with a forced smile, already bracing himself for the impending storm. "Finally!" she huffed, pushing past him without invitation. "I've been ringing the doorbell for ages. What took you so long?" Eli bit back a retort, reminding himself that confrontation would only escalate the situation. I was in the other room, he said, trying to keep his tone even. Well, next time, try to be a bit more attentive, Kira chided, dropping her purse onto the couch with a loud thump. Where's Mara? I need to discuss the arrangements for my next visit. Eli's gut twisted at the mention of his wife's name. Mara's not here, he said quietly. She's staying with her parents for a while. Kira's perfectly sculpted brows shot up in surprise. What? Why on earth would she do that? Eli swallowed hard, the weight of his failure pressing down upon him like a physical burden. She needed some space, he admitted, unable to meet his sister's piercing gaze. Space? Kira scoffed. From what? Her perfect little life? She's just being dramatic as usual. Eli clenched his jaw, her words reigniting the embers of resentment that had been smoldering within him since Mara's departure. She needed space from you, Kira, he blurted out, the truth tumbling from his lips before he could stop it. Silence hung in the air, thick with tension. Kira's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line of anger. Excuse me? Eli took a deep breath, steeling his resolve. Mara couldn't handle your constant intrusions anymore. Your disrespect for her boundaries, your complete lack of consideration, it became too much. Kira's face flushed with indignation. How dare you speak to me like that? I'm family, Eli. I have every right to be here, to be involved in your lives. Eli shook his head, anger and frustration bubbling up within him. No, Kira, you don't. Not when you treat our home like your personal playground, not when you trample over Mara's wishes and make her feel disrespected in her own house. Kira opened her mouth to protest, but Eli held up a hand, silencing her. You've been nothing but a hindrance, Kira, a constant source of stress and chaos, and I've been too blind to see it. As the words tumbled out, Eli felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, a burden he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. Confronting Kira, standing up to her entitled behavior, it was long overdue. Well, if that's how you feel, then maybe I won't come around as often, Kira snapped, grabbing her purse and storming towards the door. Eli watched her go, a strange sense of relief washing over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt as though he could breathe, as though the suffocating weight of Kira's presence had finally been lifted. But as the silence settled over the house once more, a new realization began to dawn on him. Mara had been right all along. She had seen the truth, had tried to make him understand the damage Kira was causing. And he had failed her, time and time again, choosing to maintain the peace rather than protect his own family. As the full weight of his negligence crashed over him, Eli felt a surge of determination. He couldn't undo the past, but he could make amends. He could prove to Mara that he was finally ready to stand by her side, to fight for their family and the life they deserved. With renewed purpose, Eli began to assess the chaos that Kira had left in her wake. The empty fridge, the cluttered living room, the trail of demands and complaints, it was a harsh reality check, a glimpse into the daily struggles that Mara had endured for far too long. As he worked to restore order to their home, Eli's resolve grew stronger with each passing minute. He would not fail Mara again. He would show her, through his actions and his unwavering support, that he was ready to be the partner she deserved. And when she finally returned, he would make things right, no matter what it took. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted me from my thoughts. I peered through the living room window, my heart leaping into my throat as I recognized my parents' familiar sedan. The moment of truth had arrived. I steeled myself, taking a deep breath as the front door swung open. Mara stepped inside, her eyes immediately finding mine. For a moment, we simply stared at one another, the weight of all that had transpired hanging heavy in the air. Mara, I began, my voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. She blinked, surprise flickering across her features. Sorry? For what exactly? I ran a hand through my hair, struggling to find the right words. For everything. For not seeing the truth. For not standing up to Kira and protecting you. Protecting our family. Mara's expression hardened, her jaw clenching. It's a little late for apologies, Eli. I begged you to intervene, to put an end to Kira's disrespect and entitlement. But you just let it happen, over and over again. Her words stung, but I knew I deserved them. You're right. I was blind and I failed you in the worst way. But I promise you, Mara, my eyes are open now. I finally see the damage Kira was causing, the stress and chaos she inflicted upon us. Oh, really? Mara's voice dripped with skepticism. And what exactly opened your eyes? I took a deep breath, knowing that the truth would be difficult to hear. After you left, Kira came over, as belligerent and entitled as ever. She couldn't understand why you needed space, why you felt the need to get away from her constant intrusions. Mara's eyes widened, and I pressed on, determined to lay everything bare. I couldn't hold back any longer. I confronted her, told her the truth about how she had trampled over your boundaries and made you feel disrespected in your own home. You stood up to Kira? Mara's voice was laced with disbelief. I nodded, a sense of shame washing over me. I know, I should have done it sooner, but better late than never, right? Mara shook her head slowly, her expression unreadable. And what did Kira say? How did she react? I grimaced at the memory. She was furious, of course. Couldn't handle the truth. She stormed out, said she wouldn't be coming around as much. Mara's lips curved into a humorless smile. So she threw a tantrum and left, as usual. And you think that's enough? That standing up to her once, after years of enabling her behavior, is going to make everything better? Her words stung, but I knew she was right. No, of course not. I know I have a lot of work to do, a lot of trust to rebuild. But I'm ready, Mara. I'm ready to be the partner you deserve, to fight for our family and put you first. Silence hung in the air, thick with tension. Mara's gaze searched mine, her eyes glimmering with a mixture of hope and wariness. I want to believe you, Eli, I really do. But words aren't enough anymore. You have to prove it to me through your actions and your unwavering support. I nodded, my resolve hardening. I know, and I will, Mara. I promise you, I will do whatever it takes to make things right between us. Mara's expression softened, just a fraction. We'll see, she said, her voice laced with a cautious optimism. But for now, I think it's best if I stay with my parents for a little while longer. It wasn't the outcome I had hoped for, but I knew I had no one to blame but myself. I had allowed this rift to form, had failed to protect my wife and our family. And now I would have to work twice as hard to bridge that divide, to prove that I was ready to be the partner she deserved. As Mara turned and headed back towards her parents' car, I watched her go, a newfound determination burning within me. This was my chance to make things right, to show her that I had truly learned from my mistakes, and I would not squander it. Not this time. The moving truck rumbled down the quiet street, its presence a stark contrast to the tranquil neighborhood. As it pulled up to our new home, a sense of excitement and trepidation washed over me. This was it, the fresh start we had both been craving. You ready? Eli asked, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. I took a deep breath, nodding slowly. As I'll ever be. We had been through so much, our relationship hanging by a thread after Kira's relentless intrusions. But Eli had proven himself, time and time again, standing firm against his sister's entitled demands and prioritizing our family above all else. It hadn't been easy. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of resentment that threatened to reignite the flames of our past conflicts. But we had worked through them, our communication stronger than ever. And now, as we prepared to embark on this new chapter, I couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism. The movers began unloading our belongings, and Eli and I set to work directing them through the unfamiliar rooms. As we bustled about, a familiar figure appeared on the sidewalk, her stilettos clicking against the pavement. Well, what do we have here? Kira's voice rang out, as grating as ever. I tensed, bracing myself for another confrontation. But before I could respond, Eli stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. Kira, what are you doing here? He demanded, his tone brooking no argument. She scoffed, tossing her perfectly coiffed hair over her shoulder. What do you mean? What am I doing here? I'm family, remember? I have every right to know what's going on in your lives. Eli shook his head, his stance unwavering. Not anymore, Kira. We've moved, and we're not giving you the new address. Kira's eyes widened in disbelief. What? You can't be serious. I am, Eli said firmly. We're drawing a line, Kira. After everything you put Mara through, the constant disrespect and entitlement, we're not letting you back into our lives. Kira's face flushed with anger, her perfectly sculpted features contorting into a mask of fury. How dare you? After everything I've done for you, you're just going to cut me out like this? You did this to yourself, Kira, I chimed in, my voice steady and resolute. We gave you chance after chance to treat us with respect, to honor our boundaries, but you refused, time and time again, and now you have to face the consequences. Kira's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. Fine, she spat. If that's how you want to play it, then good riddance. You'll be sorry when you realize how much you need me. With that, she spun on her heel and stalked away, her heels striking the pavement with an angry rhythm. As we watched her retreating figure, a sense of relief washed over me. We had finally reclaimed our power, our dignity, our lives. Eli pulled me into a tight embrace, his touch warm and comforting. We did it, he murmured into my hair. We stood our ground, and we won. I nodded, allowing myself to sink into his embrace. We did, and now we can start fresh, on our own terms. As we turned back towards our new home, a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. The future stretched out before us, full of promise and possibility, and for the first time in a long time, I knew that Kira's toxic presence would no longer cast a shadow over our lives. We were free to build the future we deserved, the life we had always dreamed of. And as we stepped over the threshold, hand in hand, I knew that this was just the beginning of our journey.